Most men seek the secrets to acquiring a fortune. But the wisest men of Wall Street first study the secrets to losing one. The path to financial success is not a treasure map to be followed, but a minefield to be navigated, and the first duty of the speculator is to learn the location of every explosive charge. The history of the markets, when read with a discerning eye, is not so much a chronicle of triumphs as it is a catalogue of catastrophes, each one wrought by the same fatal flaws in human character, repeated generation after generation with ruinous consistency. These are the 7 deadly sins of the ruined speculator. Avoid them, and success may find you of its own accord. The first and most common path to this self-destruction is a sin of the mind: idolatry. This is the sin of surrendering one's own judgment, of outsourcing one's thinking to another. It is the facile belief that some other man, a great operator, a supposed insider, or a charismatic advisor, possesses a secret knowledge that absolves you of the responsibility of independent thought. The habit of following points which are supposed to emanate from the big operators nearly always ends in loss and sometimes in disaster to young speculators. They become slavish in their methods of thought, having their minds entirely subjected to others who are presumed to do the thinking for them, and they consequently fail to cultivate the self-reliance that is indispensable to the success of any kind of business. This city is filled with these professional pointers and specious frauds, who hang upon the coattails of successful men, pretending to be deep in the counsels of the great pools, and dispensing their slippery tips with an air of profound authority. The credulous speculator, eager for a shortcut to wealth, latches onto this advice, mistaking it for wisdom. He is soon tossed about on the chaotic seas of rumor, buying and selling not based on his own analysis, but on the whispers of the crowd. There is a story of one such man who came to my office, a perfect illustration of this mental paralysis. He gave an order to buy 1,000 shares of Erie, which was promptly executed. Shortly thereafter, the stock declined, and he returned and ordered it sold at a loss. Within the hour, having consulted another source, he came back again and ordered it bought back at a higher price. Not long after, a fresh wave of doubt sent him back to sell it all once more, at a price far below his original purchase. Finally, he returned a 5th time, the picture of despair and confusion, and confessed, "I first saw one man who told me to buy, and then another who told me to sell. I understand one is called a bull and the other a bear. About these names I don't know much, but I do know now that I am a jackass." He had committed the sin of idolatry, worshipping at the altar of other men's opinions, and his sacrifice was his own capital. In our modern age, these false idols have multiplied. They are not merely found in the lobbies of hotels, but on every social media platform, in every financial forum promising quick riches on some hot stock. The names of the stocks change, but the game is eternal. By the time a tip has reached the masses, the opportunity has long since passed. The early insiders, the originators of the rumor, are quietly selling their shares to the very disciples who are rushing to buy on the strength of the secret information. The first step toward financial salvation is to smash these idols and begin the difficult work of thinking for yourself. If the first sin is born of a lack of confidence in oneself, the second is born of its fatal excess: arrogance. This is the illusion of effortless success, the deeply flawed conviction that fortune in finance can be achieved without the prerequisite of hard work, severe discipline, and years of practical training. It is the belief that one can conquer Wall Street by virtue of a college education, a high social standing, or a lucky start in some other field. This is a common delusion, and it is absolutely fatal to success. I have usually found that the sons of independent gentlemen who have great expectations make very poor clerks and do not develop into good Wall Street men. Their expectations seem to dwarf the ability that might develop under the more favorable auspices of being obliged to paddle their own canoe. They lack the essential incentive to work, knowing that their wants will be provided for. The very motives which forge the greatest mental qualities are absent, and their talents lie dormant. The most successful men of Wall Street, to my own personal knowledge, are those who came to the street young and have gone through the mill, so to speak. Those who have received severe training, who have had some sledgehammer blows applied to their heads to temper them, like the conversion of iron into steel. The young man of means, sheltered from this harsh but necessary education, enters the arena unprepared for its brutal realities. He is a hothouse plant thrown into a blizzard, and he withers at the first frost. This principle is not confined to the sons of the wealthy. In our time, it applies to any man who comes to the market with what he perceives as easy money, be it from an inheritance, a lottery win, or the sale of a successful business in another industry. Because he did not feel the sweat and toil required to earn that capital, he does not respect the risk of losing it. He confuses his net worth with his market wisdom. He believes that because he is rich, he must also be smart in this new and treacherous game. His arrogance makes him impatient, unwilling to start at the bottom and learn the trade. He scoffs at the need for careful study and diligent attention to detail, and this conceit makes him easy prey for the seasoned operators who understand that the market is, above all else, a great humbler of men. This arrogance invariably leads to the third sin, a transgression of intellectual boundaries that is almost always the direct cause of catastrophic loss. Overreach. This is the sin of venturing beyond one's circle of competence. It is the supremely dangerous belief that success in one domain grants you a passport to success in all others. A man may be a genius in law, a master of medicine, or a titan of industry. But if he assumes that this expertise gives him an edge in the highly specialized business of speculation, he is courting his own destruction. The business of Wall Street requires long and close training in financial affairs, so that the mind may attain a flexible facility with the various ins and outs of speculative methods. History offers no more powerful or humbling example of this truth than the financial fate of General Ulysses S. Grant. Here was a man who saved the Union, a military strategist of the highest order, a commander whose eye could take in the entire scope of a battlefield and direct vast armies to victory. Yet this same great captain of men was as helpless as a babe when Ferdinand Ward and James D. Fish moved upon his works. The mind that could plan the siege of Vicksburg and accept the surrender at Appomattox was utterly unable to penetrate the insidious designs of the young Napoleon of finance. General Grant was a victim, not of his own lack of intelligence, but of his want of early training in financial business affairs, and to the fact that he was unable to appreciate its necessity in dealing with sharp businessmen of loose morals. His genius on the battlefield was of no use to him in an arena whose rules and tactics he did not understand. An even more dramatic illustration is the career of James R. Keene. Keene was an absolute master in the world of California mining stocks. He came to the West with nothing, and, through his brilliant operations, accumulated a fortune of many millions. He understood the geology of the Comstock lode, the psychology of the San Francisco market, and the methods of the Bonanza Kings. He was a genius within his circle of competence. But then, in an evil hour, flushed with his immense success, he was induced to spread himself out all over creation. He began to speculate in everything that came along, in wheat, lard, and opium. He attempted to get a corner in all the grain in the country, a business whose vast and global complexities were entirely alien to him. This overreach proved fatal. He was utterly ruined, his $13 million fortune vanishing in a series of disastrous ventures he was not equipped to manage. The lesson for every investor, and especially the late career investor, is stark and unforgiving. The market is not a single battlefield, but a continent of many different wars, each with its own terrain, its own weapons, and its own rules of engagement. Your knowledge of manufacturing does not make you an expert in banking. Your success in real estate does not grant you wisdom in biotechnology. The third sin of overreach is the failure to recognize these borders. The path to ruin is paved with the ventures of brilliant men who strayed from the one field they had truly mastered. The first step in building an analytical fortress is to know precisely where your own land ends and the uncharted wilderness begins. If the foundational errors of thought, idolatry, arrogance, and overreach are the sins that lead a speculator astray before he even places a trade, then the next set of transgressions are the strategic and character flaws that ensure his destruction once he is in the arena. These are the errors committed in the heat of battle, the fatal miscalculations of strategy, and the deep-seated weaknesses of character that separate the enduring professional from the fleeting amateur. They are the sins of impatience, dogmatism, and deceit, and their consequences are as certain as they are severe. The fourth sin, and one that is the direct cause of countless market liquidations, is impatience, a flaw that manifests itself as the absence of a cash reserve. The ordinary man, when he speculates, is of a sanguine temperament, apt to take risks without sufficient provision against contingencies. It is common with inexperienced operators to use all their available resources in their original margin. Believing they have found a sure thing, they commit their entire capital to a single throw of the dice, leaving no ammunition in reserve. The result is that if prices go against them, even slightly, they are liable to be closed out and saddled with a loss they can ill afford. This creates a class of weak holders, and their presence in the market is a constant inducement to the professional room traders to raid the market. These seasoned predators know that by depressing prices just enough to impair the unsupported margins of the weak holders, they will trigger a rush of forced selling orders, which will in turn break down prices even further, allowing them to cover their short sales at a handsome profit. In our modern era, this sin is amplified by the seductive power of margin lending. The novice speculator, seeing that he can control $10,000 worth of stock with only a fraction of that amount in cash, feels a sense of immense power. He leverages his capital to the hilt, dreaming of the multiplied profits he will reap. He does not consider the other side of the ledger. That leverage also multiplies his losses. A minor 10% decline in his stock does not mean a 10% loss on his capital. It can mean a 50, 80, or even 100% loss. He receives the dreaded margin call from his broker, and because he has no cash reserves, he has no choice but to sell his position at the worst possible moment, at the very bottom of the decline, to satisfy the call. He is a soldier who has charged into battle with only the bullets in his rifle, and when those are spent, he is defenseless. The old veteran, by contrast, operates on the opposite principle. A significant portion of his capital is always held in cash. This cash is not an idle asset. It is his strategic reserve, his primary offensive weapon. It is not merely a defense against margin calls. It is the dry powder he keeps for the moment of maximum opportunity, the depths of a panic. While the impatient, fully margined speculator is being forced to sell his holdings at ruinous prices, the veteran is calmly stepping into the market, using his cash reserves to purchase those same assets at a fraction of their worth. His patience has armed him for the slaughter. The lack of it has made the other man the victim. The fifth sin is one of the intellect, but it is a disease of the ego, dogmatism. This is the sin of intellectual inflexibility, of falling in love with your own market thesis to such a degree that you become blind to all countervailing evidence. It is the mental rigidity that transforms a rational speculator into a chronic bull or a chronic bear, a man who operates based on a fixed internal bias rather than a clear-eyed assessment of external reality. Wall Street has its optimists and pessimists. They are such from a constitutional bent, and they are bull or bear in season and out of season. As a rule, those that follow a natural disposition, rather than the course of the market and the conditions that mold it, are sure to bankrupt themselves sooner or later. The career of Henry N. Smith is a tragic and perfect illustration of this sin. Smith, a man of immense natural talent and a former partner of Jay Gould, had at one time been immensely successful. But through his association with the great bear operator Charles F. Wurishofer, Smith became possessed by a singularly bearish view of the market. He developed a monomania, an unshakable conviction that disaster was always just around the corner. He became a consistent bear, and that dogmatic position sealed his doom. During the great upward market of 1885, as values were constantly advancing, Smith fought the market with desperation on every rally. The evidence of his senses, the rising tide of prosperity, the strength of the ticker tape, it all counted for nothing against the ironclad dogma in his own mind. He adhered steadily to the policy of attacking prices, selling short on every rally. When his own vast fortune was exhausted in this losing battle, he continued the fight on the credit of his brokers, the firm of William, Heath and Company. He went on, driven by his bearish fanaticism, until his losses became so great that he was not only ruined, but had pulled the house of Heath down with him, owing them $1 million in the final wreck. As he himself stated before the governing committee of the stock exchange, on January 1st, 1885, I was worth $1,400,000. On the following January, I had lost the whole amount and was $1,200,000 in debt. Smith's ruin was absolute, a direct result of his dogmatic refusal to accept the reality of the market. He sought to impose his will upon the ticker, and the ticker broke him. The great lesson is this: the market owes you nothing, least of all a confirmation of your opinions. Your task is not to argue with it, but to understand it. The true operator has no permanent beliefs. He has only working hypotheses, which he is ready to discard in an instant the moment the facts no longer support them. The sixth sin is one of character, a moral failing that, while it may offer the illusion of short-term gain, invariably leads to long-term ruin: deceit. This is the sin of believing that lasting success can be built upon a foundation of dishonesty, manipulation, and a lack of personal honor. It is the most corrosive of all the sins, for it not only destroys capital but also annihilates the one asset that, once lost, can never be fully regained: a man's good name. The history of Wall Street is littered with the wreckage of men who believed they were clever enough to thrive on chicanery. None is more instructive than Ferdinand Ward, the young Napoleon of finance. Ward's entire method was a huge confidence game. He created an illusion of impossible profits, promising investors immense returns on fictitious government contracts. His presence was magnetic, his manner disarmingly plausible. He deceived some of the most eminent men of his time, including the great General Grant, whose name he used to solidify and extend his credit. For a time, his success was dazzling. Money poured into his firm, and he lived like a prince. But the entire structure was built on lies. There were no contracts. There were no profits. It was merely a scheme of paying old investors with the money of new ones. When the supply of new victims ran out, the entire edifice collapsed in one of the most spectacular failures of the era, and Ward's meteoric career ended as it was destined to in a prison cell. He was a genius of deceit, but his triumph was fleeting, his ruin absolute and permanent. The same principle applies to the political corruption of the Tweed Ring, which sought to manipulate the money market through its control of the city's funds, creating artificial stringency to aid its political and financial schemes. Their power seemed absolute, their wealth limitless, but their foundation was rotten, and they too ended in disgrace and ruin. Let the lesson be seared into the mind of every man who enters the financial arena. No great business can be built up except upon honest and moral principles. It may flourish for a time, but it will topple down eventually. But how does one learn to recognize these patterns of self-destruction before becoming their victim? How can one understand the psychology of a charlatan like Ward or a manipulator like Drew? There is one resource that is not simply a book, but a veritable treasure trove of historical case studies. The new, complete 2-volume edition of 50 Years in Wall Street is more than a memoir. It is a detailed guide to financial pathologies. On its 1,000 pages of original text by Henry Clews, replete with all the historical photographs, you will find an autopsy of failure. You will read not just of the successes, but of the catastrophes, of how arrogance, deceit, and dogmatism led, time and again, to utter ruin. It is the school of Wall Street's hard knocks, a place where you can learn the lessons for which other men paid millions. For the investor who wishes to understand not only how to win, but more importantly, how not to lose, this work is utterly indispensable. The link is in the description. If the flaws of idolatry, arrogance, and overreach are the sins that lead a speculator into a minefield, and the strategic errors of impatience, dogmatism, and deceit are what cause him to step carelessly, then the seventh and final sin is the detonation itself. It is the climactic transgression where all other errors converge in a single catastrophic moment of failure. This is the sin of fear, the complete and utter capitulation of reason to the primal contagious emotion of the crowd. It is the sin of selling at the bottom of a panic, not because your analysis has changed, but simply because the psychological pain of the decline has become unbearable. It is the final tragic act in the drama of financial self-destruction. To understand the overwhelming power of this force, one need only look to the great panics that have periodically convulsed Wall Street. Consider the panic of 1857. Following the collapse of the Ohio Life and Trust Company, a firm once considered a pillar of American finance, business became completely paralyzed. It was not a slow decline. It was a sudden stop. Credit, the very lifeblood of commerce, evaporated overnight. In the panic that followed the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, though the event itself was geographically distant, the shockwave hit Wall Street with incredible force. Prices broke 4 at 10 points. On Tuesday there was great excitement. Sales were enormous and fluctuations wide. In these moments, logic vanishes. The carefully constructed analyses, the rational calculations of intrinsic value, they are all consumed by a single overriding emotion, fear. And fear in a market is a contagion more potent than any plague. It spreads from man to man, from firm to firm, not through reason, but through the raw, visceral sight of falling prices and the panicked faces of one's peers. Even strong minds, if they are not specifically trained and temperamentally fortified for such an ordeal, are swept away by the current. The impulse to sell, to get out at any price, to simply make the pain stop, becomes an irresistible biological urge. This is the ultimate test for the speculator. All his training, all his study, all his carefully laid plans are brought to bear in this single moment of crisis. Can he remain rational when all about him are losing their minds? Can he trust his own analysis of a company's value when the ticker tape is screaming of a world ending? Can he calmly execute his plan to buy when every instinct is telling him to join the stampede for the exits? The man who succumbs to this final sin, the man who allows the crowd's terror to become his own, finds himself selling his finest assets for a pittance to the very old veterans who have been patiently waiting for this precise moment of capitulation. He liquidates his share of a great enterprise at a fraction of its worth, locking in a devastating and permanent loss of capital, only to watch, months or years later, as the very same stock recovers to its former heights and beyond. He has committed the most unforgivable of financial sins. He has sold a wonderful business for a terrible price out of pure, unadulterated fear. But the study of these 7 sins is not an end in itself. It is not an exercise in financial morbidly. Its purpose is to illuminate the path to salvation. By inverting these paths to ruin, we can clearly delineate the virtues that define the character of the successful operator, the man who not only survives the trials of the market, but prospers because of them. These are not secret techniques. They are the enduring qualities of a well-tempered mind and a disciplined character. Against the sin of idolatry, the successful speculator cultivates the virtue of independent thought. He is a man who thinks for himself, who does his own work, and who trusts his own judgment above the clamor of the crowd. Against the sin of arrogance, he cultivates humility and a respect for labor. He understands that the market is a great teacher and that its lessons are often severe. He approaches it not as a conqueror, but as a student, knowing that success is never guaranteed and must be earned through diligent effort. Against the sin of overreach, he cultivates intellectual honesty. He knows the precise boundaries of his own competence. He has the courage to admit what he does not know, and the discipline to never venture beyond those limits, no matter how tempting the prize may seem. Against the sin of impatience, he cultivates patient preparation. He understands that cash is not a dead asset, but a strategic weapon. He has the discipline to hold his fire, sometimes for years, preserving his capital for the rare and extraordinary opportunities that market turmoil provides. Against the sin of dogmatism, he cultivates mental flexibility. He holds no permanent opinions, only working hypotheses. He has the wisdom to abandon a failing thesis the moment the facts change, for his loyalty is to reality, not to his own ego. Against the sin of deceit, he cultivates unwavering personal honor. He recognizes that his word is his bond, and that his reputation for integrity is his most valuable asset, a form of capital that once lost can never be fully recovered. And finally, against the sin of fear, he cultivates courageous rationality. He has the fortitude to remain calm in the midst of chaos, the strength to be greedy when others are fearful, and the conviction to act upon his own analysis when all the world is selling in a panic. The path to wealth in Wall Street, then, is not the pursuit of a secret formula or a shortcut to riches. It is the forging of a certain character, a character defined by these 7 virtues. It is a lifelong process of discipline, study, and self-mastery. The 7 sins of speculation are not simply errors in judgment. They are flaws of character. They are timeless because human nature is unchanging. Understanding them is the first step toward avoiding them. The path to success in Wall Street is not an easy walk, but a rigorous discipline that demands the very best that is in a man.